What drives people to a God search? Well, sometimes it's just a lot of confusion. Hi, I'm Michael Shevack. Welcome to God Search. You're here to, well, be encouraged. Be encouraged because I don't know if God exists, never met the person, but I can tell you for sure, there is such a thing as the experience, which is called God. There's unity, there's truth, and a sense of complete alignment so that your actions and the environment that you're around cohere, they become integrated, and you experience good. God's just a little bit of a contraction of the word good. We're going to continue my personal exploration on interviews, which I am not good at, and I'm just kind of winging it to, expand as a person. God searches require you to expand. And here's another interview. This is my buddy. He's Dr. Arik Greenberg. These titles are really great. Clinical Associate Professor of Theology at Loyola Marymount University. And he is also president of the Institute for Religious Tolerance, Peace, and Justice. Wow. Dr. Greenberg, Arik, lots of degrees go into your God search, Help me tell us about your God search.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for having me on the show. This is an absolute delight, a delight to be here. To answer your question, yeah, it's a lot of academic degrees there, but my personal search for God, my God search, began probably at the age of 1 or 2. I grew up in what I would consider an interfaith background. My mother was raised in pre-Vatican II Roman Catholicism back in the 1940s and 50s and so forth.
Tough stuff.
She was, pardon?
Tough stuff.
Yes, yes. Oh, absolutely. And, I don't know how much many of your viewers know about pre-Vatican II, but those are the days where monks and nuns and priests were encouraged to beat the children, among other things. So a very different environment. She fled screaming from the church in the 1960s or so and started exploring Judaism because she had a lot of Jewish friends and she admired the intellectualism of Judaism, the search, the God search in Judaism, wrestling with God. She didn't find a lot of that in pre-Vatican II Catholicism. Um, so she met my dad in college in the 1950s and 60s. They didn't get married until the late 1960s. Now, my dad was raised an Ashkenazi Jew in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. But they both got married in the synagogue. And so that became the root, the foundation of their spirituality, their religion. But after that, they both realized that organized religion was not serving them the way that they thought they were. So while here they were a married Jewish couple, my mom kind of, I would say, pioneered the way through a very sort of a 1970s hippie-ish understanding of what Judaism is, far beyond the davening and all that kind of stuff. But I'd say a lot of ways a sort of an Allen Ginsberg-esque kind of understanding of Judaism incorporating Jubus and Hindus and people doing yoga or agnostics and atheists who still consider themselves Jewish. So here I was in the 1970s, raised a very different Jew than most of my classmates who were doing Hebrew school and preparing for their bar and bat mitzvahs. And here I was at a hippie health food store learning about Kundalini yoga from a bunch of aging Jewish hippies. These were family friends who really helped shape my understanding of my Judaism, which was far more expansive than just, going to the Hebrew school and all that. So here I am learning about Sufism and about Kundalini yoga and about aspects of Hinduism and Buddhism. And so that shaped my God search to be a very eclectic understanding of where God is. And so I grew up walking around outside in the forest speaking, whether they were actually listening or not, but hearing in my mind, speaking to Muhammad, speaking to Buddha, speaking to Moses, speaking to God. So when I got to college in the 1980s
But
and
was
90s,
you were sane, right?
I think I was sane as one
Were you
can be.
clinically sane? I mean, if someone stopped you, you would know your birthday or what day it was and what you did before.
Yes, yeah. Now I'm not saying they spoke back, but this was part of my childhood environment was trying to speak to these figures equally, that none of them was any better than the other. So, but yeah, I've never received any kind of diagnosis of clinical insanity. So I suppose I'm still default. I'm okay. So going to college, initially I wanted to be an archaeologist, just like Indiana Jones, but that kind of fell through. It no longer interested me. But I was in a class, Old Testament Hebrew Bible, with Dr. Jeremy Zwelling, who was just wonderful. And I had just come out of a midterm of another class, and I was just tired. And I remember buying a can of Jolt Cola because I never drink caffeine at all, and I don't drink sodas. But I thought I need to be awake for Jeremy Zwelling's class because he calls on people. He'll actively say, "Arik, what do you think about this or that?" And I wanted to be ready for that, having been up all night studying for a midterm in another class. And so I drank this can of Jolt Cola, and by 20 minutes into the class, I was wired because, like I said, I don't do caffeine, so I'm wired. And so I'm raising my hands and answering questions, and I'm thinking, what would it be like to be a religion major? Because this kind of inquiry is feeding me in ways that I have not been fed in any other way. And I turned to a friend of mine, maybe just a few people down in the row, and I said, "Ethan." He said, "What?" I said, I think I want to be a religion major. And he said, "Good," as if I had lost my mind. Like, why are you telling me this? But I realized from that point onward, I need to never drink Jolt Cola again for fear that it would undo the effects. But from that point onward, I never looked back. I realized, all right, I need to study religion on an academic level because I was confused about my religious identity. I didn't know who I was. All I knew was that I loved religion. I loved God as I understood him, her, or it, but I needed to understand better because I'm confused coming from this
When
background.
you
Here,
were when you were engaging personally through talking, which is a form of prayer, okay?
mm,
Because you're engaging with something in your mind, okay?
mhm.
Did you get an answer? Did you feel that they were talking back, or was this your own personal dialogue?
I'll be honest with you. This was childhood imagination. I never heard anything back from them at the time, but it prepared me for talking to God in a
Okay,
personal
so I
sense.
just want to say something to those people out there. Something as innocent as talking to what you imagine Buddha is or what you relate to as a child, that's powerful. And you may not be particularly aware that you're getting answered. But as you continue on your God search, you're going to notice that those little things opened you up to something that was much larger than anything you can even imagine. So, Arik, all I'm telling you is that kind of thing can confuse you more because you are bringing in fields of organized knowledge that are associated with each of these religious leaders. And you may not be aware of it, but your actual body is expanding in multiple directions, and there are confusions between each of the different religious perspectives, and they don't cohere.
Mm,
And if you are a universalist, meaning you're seeking a universal culture for everyone, you you're going to have trouble because they teach different things, they're specialties. And I just want to
mm,
point out that that is not just innocent. When you're talking to these people with the innocence and simple heart open faith of a kid, you're downloading big time.
mm.
Downloading big
Interesting.
time. So what did the academics do for you?
The academics gave me more questions to ask. I don't think the academics gave me any real hard and fast answers, and that's maybe one of the things that I've tried to bring back to my not only my teaching but my interfaith work. I know I wanted to talk a little bit about my interfaith work because that is an extension of my academic work, but it's also separate from my academic work because I am a very hardcore activist for interreligious dialogue, interreligious collaboration. And while on one hand, yes, I would say I am a little bit of a universalist to some degree, where I believe that there's a kernel of faith in every religious tradition, a kernel of truth in every faith tradition. But on the other hand, I do acknowledge what you're saying, that there are maybe different influences of the way that God appears in the world. So I don't know if I have any answers for people as to what is the best method or what is the best pathway, but I talk to people about looking for common ground, starting with the common ground, but also simultaneously acknowledging and embracing and celebrating the differences between our religions,
Hmm.
but finding a way to not kill each other over those differences too.
Yeah. Well, was your approach very active, or were you trying to open up and be kind of receptive? Because,
In terms of my spiritual
yeah, in terms of your God search, how did you do it? Was it more of a meditation, meaning in terms of opening up to a feeling experience, or were you actually kind of doing what I did, which was I was brutal. I mean, I just was
mm,
absolutely brutal and tore everything into shreds and reassembled everything. And then it
mm,
was a mess. I mean, what would you
yeah.
say that your path was?
I would say that it was fairly active because I have investigated a number of faith traditions on a personal level. I mean, I spent a lot of time in college and grad school personally practicing Zen Buddhist meditation. I had even spent a little bit of time in Korea at a different type of non-Zen, but a different type of Buddhist community, meditating and chanting with them for a while. Also being at a Christian seminary, because that's where I got my master's degrees, spending a lot of time in a very progressive, liberal, spiritual kind of a Christian environment, praying with them. But I've also, in the last decade or more, through my interfaith work, I've spent a lot of time with Muslims, praying with them, with Sikhs, praying with them, with a variety of different people of different traditions, even in Hinduism, praying with them and reading the Bhagavad Gita. So I've tried to incorporate a lot of this in my life and investigate it very actively. And I've gotten a significant amount out of these religions. I don't think any of them have not given me something. I spent like, especially in terms of my understanding of the problem of human suffering, I often go back to the Bhagavad Gita, specifically chapters 9 through 12, in terms of understanding the why there's so much horror in the world. To some degree, I think that satisfies me a little bit even more than the Book of Job in the Old Testament. That this is part of the unhappy side of God. That God is more than just rainbows and bunny rabbits and cotton candy kisses. If we want to accept and love a God that is universal, that is everywhere, and not limit God, then God is also the God of heart attacks and firestorms and warfare. Not to say that these are promoted, but that this is God reigns on the just and the unjust alike. And these are the things that we have to accept as part of God, whether or not they're evil. I mean, I don't think necessarily a heart attack is evil. It's just unpleasant for that person. Um,
Well, evil, again, if you define evil as that which is taking away your material individuality and reducing you back down to the elements of the planet, it's pretty bad. You know,
mhm.
I agree with you that I think part of the great problem with God as an and this thing that people are searching for is that they may make God so good that they don't know what to do with the other reality of the life. And you
Yeah.
somehow have to include loving God with a sadomasochistic edge to it at all. And if you can't combine the two, you certainly don't have anything that resembles a monotheism or a singular God. You can't accommodate the human experience. So
Yeah.
did you suffer?
Did I suffer? I've
Yeah.
suffered.
Did you
I mean,
suffer? Did you suffer and say thanks God?
I've tried to say thanks. There are some times I've said some choice words to God.
Yeah, I hope so.
Uh, yeah, yeah, and and of course, it's no secret that I've worked with you for a couple of years, and you've had a profound influence on my life. But I think one of the things that I've gotten from your book specifically is the reference to an alien planet that might have an atmosphere that is utterly toxic to human beings. Well, if I step on that planet, is it evil to me? Well, it reduces me to a quivering mass trying to gasp for my breath, but there's nothing necessarily evil about it to the inhabitants of that planet. So, in that way, have I suffered? Yeah, I've suffered, and I think there's a little anecdote that I wanted to bring up regarding suffering, and this has been a big part of my search. I talk about it in my book, and
You
if
can
it's okay to
you can
mention.
show your books anytime you want.
Okay, thank you so much. So,
Book
so
show,
what's it?
book show.
Yeah, book show. Yeah. So this is The Exile, which is the first book in the Exile trilogy, a devoted son's spiritual journey. The second book in the series is called I Am the Exile, book two of the trilogy. And then I love the title of the last one. It was inspired. It actually came to me from an angel. I'm positive. I didn't write this. Somebody else wrote it and whispered in my ear. A necromantic incantation and an angry love letter to God. That's the third book in the trilogy.
Light
And
stuff.
yeah, very light stuff. I had to decide where to apportion each of the books because it is essentially just one long narrative, or as I think you playfully called it at one point, 1,000 pages of kvetching, and I corrected you and I said 1,500
All right,
pages.
wait. Let's translate. For those people who are out there that don't understand any kind of Yiddish, kvetching means chronic complaining.
Exactly. And you were right. It was me grappling with God, grappling with the not so happy things that happened to my family or in my life or into my parents that to some degree I felt responsible for because I wanted to be the dutiful, loving
All right,
son.
wait. Slow down here.
Yeah.
Three books were born out of pain and suffering and complaining.
Yes.
What's the complaint? I know you just told me that you have to appreciate that God has to somehow include the misery you have. Otherwise, God is too good and unbelievably Pollyanna and happy, which doesn't fit reality. So
Yeah.
your God search was really propelled by confusion as to your identity and raw suffering, emotional
Yes.
suffering.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
seems, unless I'm wrong, is sadness that the world doesn't get along.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. The first book I'll mention, it focuses on the period of time in my family where my mother was a clinical compulsive hoarder. And the house, the family home that I grew up in, that my grandfather built. It was the last house he built. Um, Called in all of his favors from his from his colleagues, and they built a house for his daughter and her family. And that's where I grew up. And it was a beloved house to me. But gradually, my mother filled it with more and more junk to to assuage her own pain, because as we came to realize over the years, she was a very, very severely abused child. And as the dutiful son, in a lot of ways, I started feeling that like this was somehow my responsibility to protect her, to defend her, even though I was born, what, 30 years after she was. How could I protect her? But so here I was trying to make the lives of my parents better, to save them from themselves, to save them from their mental illness that they began to deal with as they grew older. And here I am trying to save these two elderly folks from the decline and fall that happens to all of us in addition to their mental illness. And so the first book talks about that compulsive hoarding and me trying to save them. And it ends on a relatively happy note where the house is livable. All right, it's livable, because the town authorities, they got involved. They kicked my parents out of their house until further notice, until you can make this house safe, and abide by certain hygienic guidelines. And I had to get actively involved and go there and literally empty out rooms and put them in 40-yard dumpsters. This was part of the pain, trying to save my mother from her addiction to junk, which was in turn a reaction to her misery from an abusive childhood. So the first book ends on a reasonably happy note, but I mention at the end is that, well, these things happen. God suddenly put an 80-foot tall oak tree on top of the house during Hurricane Irene in 2011. So even though we're happy, we're safe, we're in the house again, and yet it continues. There's more pain and suffering. But to some degree, I feel like God had put us through all those things to clean up the house so that they would be able to have egress from the house when something like that oak tree happened. So
So
here's the good and the not so good.
yeah, so it sounds like to me, first of all, when you say the phrase God put us there,
Yeah.
okay, do you actually think about this as being, you know, some, guy or whatever, let's be gender sensitive these days, it just drives me crazy. Some dude just saying, okay, we're going to move Arik there? Or how do you mean that expression for all these people who have these issues with what theologians would call theodicy? which is
Hmm.
like the
Yes.
Odyssey. It means kind of explaining the fact that God is mean. Now,
Yeah.
why? So, how do you relate to that expression? God did this to me. I
Yeah.
mean,
And I always tell my students, I introduce them to a little bit of Greek because that's a good Greek word, theodiki, meaning divine justice, or how does God bring the justice into our lives? Um, and so I have grave trouble believing in a God that is random or believing in a universe that is random. I mean, I'm sure there is certain randomness. I don't know. I can't say for certain, but in my understanding, I don't want to worship a God, excuse me, I don't want to worship a God who is only a really nice guy and knows everything, but can't do anything about it. This is the trouble that I have with Harold Kushner's book. God bless him, great author, brings up great questions, but his conclusions of that sometimes God just can't intervene. I'm saying I don't want to worship a God like that. That's just your rich next door neighbor. All right. I don't want to worship my rich next door neighbor. Maybe he can give me some stock tips, but maybe he drinks,
I
he
worship
cheats.
him. Man, if he gave me some really good stock tips, I would worship him. Harold
Yeah.
Kushner, in case those people are out there, wrote a very famous book. What is it? What is it?
Bad things happen to good people, I
Right,
think is,
when
I
bad
think,
things happen to good people. Yeah,
yeah,
so when you say that God does this to you, how do
right.
you think about it? Do you think
Well,
about punishment as
right, right.
punishment, or do you think about it as intervening through the punishment, through
Yeah.
the
My
suffering?
yeah, my understanding of that is sort of a combination, a hodgepodge of of Jewish, Christian, Muslim, and Hindu ideas of that. So I can't see God's implementation or inserting suffering into our lives as purely punishment. I can't see it as capricious and random and pointless. I think a lot of it, in my understanding, it has to be instructive. There has to be a benefit to it, that we're being raised to a higher level of consciousness, a higher level of spiritual maturity, and to some degree, we've just got to just go through it and
So,
learn from it. That's what I hope is there.
so you can, well, then you treat it as if it is that.
Yeah, I treat it as if it were largely instructive.
Right.
Maybe some of it's punishment for some people. I don't know. Maybe that's how
All
it
right.
works, but
So when you treat it, not knowing really whether or not it is
yeah,
punishment or what, or whether God is intentionally designing each thing, going away from
mm,
that, you're nonetheless treating it as a fact in your life that it is purposeful.
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
Now, when you do that, what's its effect on you?
Well, I think, very much like Viktor Frankl, in that we make meaning out of our suffering. I'm trying to make meaning out of it, and I wind up getting some kind of meaning out of it. And that's why I think I wanted to mention some other aspects of the trilogy, where ultimately, after my parents have died, and there's this episode, and you and I talked about it extensively, um, when my mother was the last of the two to die. They both died within 2 months of each other, and my my mother had died of complications of breast cancer, widely metastatic breast cancer. And when she died, we were in the hospital in Chula Vista in San Diego. And early in the morning, I got a phone call. This was in the midst of all the phone calls from the mortuaries and the hospice service and all that. I got a phone call from the San Diego Eye Bank. And I thought, what's this all about? And a very lovely young woman on the end of the line said, look, we received a word from the doctors, and they said that your mom's eyes would be usable, and we could use these for either transplants for other patients, or possibly medical research. That there are things that we could use them for, and that they have been adjudicated sound enough that if you are willing to speak for her, because we see that she was a donor and you have power of attorney, we would like to have her eyes. And my mom had seen a lot of horror in her life, as we discussed this, child abuse, and part of me was like, here I, excuse me, here I am, the protector of her body in extremis. Here she is, she's dead, and I'm the one who gets to say what happens to her body. I want to protect her body from any more pain then she has to endure. But on the other hand, I know that she was a loving, giving person, and she'd want to give her eyes to somebody else. To me, this would be the happy end. Excuse me, I'm getting choked up. I'm getting verklempt about this. It still affects me over a decade later. That she would want to help people. She'd want this to be a happy end to a not so happy story. And so I made that decision that morning, and I told the woman on the end of the phone, I said, all right, we'll do it. And I said, please let me know. I know you can't give names and dates or of people, but please let me know what happens to these. So this became, to some degree, a happy ending for the story for me for a while. I got a phone call from her several weeks later saying, we're very sorry, but we were unable to use your mom's eyes. And I said, what do you mean? You said that the doctors said, despite the fact that her cancer was widely metastatic, they assured me that if they cut into her eyes, they're going to be able to use these. They wanted mainly her corneas.
Sure.
And she said, yeah, on two separate occasions, two separate surgeries, two separate individual recipients, she said the tissue collapsed on the operating table. I
Mm-hmm.
said, what do you mean the tissue collapsed on the operating table? She said they just were unusable. That here they are in the middle of helping two separate people get a cornea. They were unable to use my mom's eyes. And I said, is there any possibility they could have been saved for the medical research that you talked about? She said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I didn't hold it against her. On some level, I held it against the doctors for maybe being careless in adjudicating that this woman in her 70s who with widely metastatic cancer, that maybe her eyes were not going to be good, and that I had been, I don't know, swindled into putting my mom's body through more abuse. And I was angry with them. But you know who I was really angry with? I was angry with God. I was angry with God. And I was saying a lot of F you, God. F you, God. Why would you do this to me? Why would you do this to my mother? You swindled us. You made us think that here I was doing something good, that this is going to be a happy ending to the story, that here's two separate people and they're going to have the eyes of Barbara Greenberg. And there's a little bit of her in these people, but no, you've inconvenienced not one, but two separate families, not just the individual, but the families. And there's the family waiting around for their grandfather or grandmother to have new eyes, and they are thoroughly inconvenienced by this unnecessary surgery. And now they're cursing the name of Barbara Greenberg and her family, even though they don't know her name. All right. And I was angry. And I said, that's it, God. You and I are done. We're done. I've had it with you. And, as with any loving family, I couldn't stay away from God entirely. And so I resumed talking to God probably in the next year, but not directly to God, but through the angels.
All right, wait.
I thought,
I have to chime in here. I hear two things.
yeah,
One is I hear someone who adapts the kind of functional methodology of treating anything that happens as if it's some kind of teaching for the expansion of your consciousness. And then at the same time, I hear you getting overwhelmed emotionally and just complaining about the fact that these teaching tools are purposeless, they have no meaning, and you have a sadomasochistic god like Zeus who comes down and he rapes, people and kills them and turns them into swans and does all sorts of stuff. Now, there were two Arik Greenbergs here. They're in all of us, okay? But how do you take the one with the complete faith that all of this is for the expansion of yourself, and how do you have that live in the same supposedly singular body, which you really don't have? You got multiple bodies. We've discussed that a little bit out there. How do you take the condemning for the fact that a human experienced bad, which might not happen on another planet where, bodies are softer and, it's a different kind of physiology. How do you put the two together in something that has like one Arik Greenberg? I mean, talk about confusion of gods. I'm also wondering, are the confusions of gods confused because of the confusions in humans, or is it anything about God at all, but just us? I mean, how do you put the pieces together?
Yeah, yeah. It wasn't easy, and it took at least a decade or more, and it continued in my
Have
work
you
with you
have you
because
succeeded? Because to tell you the truth, ah, I haven't succeeded.
yeah.
No, I mean I put together three versions, each in
Mm.
its place, and it works. But combining them, I find to be one of the strangest things I've ever even attempted to do. I mean, do you have any kind of, can you give me a pointer on how to pull these two
Yeah.
pieces together?
Well, I know from our work together, I know you're smarter than me, so I don't know how many pointers I can give you,
Don't be
but
so certain. I'm also considerably older. You will
well,
be a wise old man too one day.
I'd like to be.
So,
Yeah,
so have
not
you,
just a wiseacre.
how do you handle those two sides?
Yeah. It's been difficult, and I'll say that during that time period I started kind of, like I said, it's a family. I was willing to talk with God through my brothers and sisters, through the angels, saying, "All right, well, tell God this, tell God that." But it was sort of my way of coming a little bit closer to God again. But I still, at the time, I kept thinking, I'm going to show God that I'm more righteous and more compassionate than he is. I'm going to be as good as possible. I'm going to love as many
Sure.
people as possible and just do as much good in the world to show him that he's the bastard that he is. I'm going to do that. And I did that for a decade, all right? But I think what pulled me out of it was when you and I had a discussion and I told you that story and you asked me a question. You said, "Who were you thinking about when you were cogitating about whether to give your mom's eyes to the charity or not?" I said, "Well, I was thinking about humanity. I was thinking about my mom's body." And you said, "Did you ever think of yourself?" And I said, "No, I didn't. I didn't. That was the one person I wasn't thinking about." Because here I am trying to figure out, well, why would a loving and benevolent God make such a very absurd ending to that story that basically benefits nobody? It doesn't benefit my mom in retrospect. It doesn't benefit the two families that were inconvenienced that needed eyes. Who does it benefit? But you had said that sometimes this is the way the universe works, and that it was in some ways a way to wake me up to the fact that I need to consider myself, that I did not want my mom's body to be cut into. Now, maybe my ultimate decision would have been the same. I would have said, yes, take her eyes because there's a chance that someone will be helped. But the fact is that I was not considering myself. And this has become part of my God search from that point onward. Now, I don't know if that makes my life any happier, but I'm starting at least to consider, where do I fit into it? To what degree am I impacted by these decisions?
Yeah.
That's helped me a little bit,
You
a
know,
little bit.
it's two thoughts. I didn't remember ever saying that, but that sometimes happens to me all the time. I never remember. It was pretty good, pretty good. So,
In my book.
two things. That's very curious because life works, in my experience, on a God search in very thematically
Mhm,
related ways. And I find it just fascinating with what you just said that you work for Loyola Marymount,
mhm,
and here you have Ignatius Loyola, who was known for for his teaching methodology, which was extremely focused on making the individual as egoless as possible.
mhm,
All right. To the point that I don't remember how he said it, but he said something to the effect of that you should be like a cadaver, meaning not
mhm,
having anything that resembles an ego. And it's also very curious because in the story of the Blessed Mother, you know, she submits to the birth of the child through the Holy Spirit. She doesn't sit
mhm.
around going, "What? You want me to be pregnant?" You know, if she was a Jewish mother, you'd expect something like that. What are you talking about? This is crazy. No, she actually hears it and she submits and puts herself second. So you have both in Loyola and Mary, right? You both have this the placing of your egos as secondary to the larger thing. And I think that's fascinating that even the that you're sent to even a university who named after people who made that kind of selflessness. The other thought that I have, and I'm going to try this on with you because it just, popped in my head. Given the fact that your mother had such a painful childhood and viewed the world through that lens of pain, okay?
Mhm.
Is it possible that she so never cleaned up how she saw through pain that her corneas were of no spiritual use to people? That
Mhm.
her view had been so distorted and so um, anti-life affirming. However much she tried, she never relinquished that kind of diseased view, that her corneas could not refract and help people spiritually. I mean, we're so programmed to look at physical things as if they're body parts. We forget old-fashioned spiritual teachings where the body is an expression of the soul through different, mental components. I mean, how do you feel about the fact that your mother's eyes may have been ruined by her perspective?
Oh
And
yeah, I am willing to see that. Yeah. And in our discussions at the time, you talked a little bit about that. I think the thing that stuck out to me was your question to me about where does Arik Greenberg fit into this? Where was my will or my desire? But I also recall you saying that there's these thematic things going on that are on a much higher level that maybe I'm not understanding, and that may be why God or the universe chose or allowed this to happen, where her eyes were simply unusable, and it was beyond just a simple happy story of yay, Barbara Margaret Greenberg's eyes are in these two other families' eyes, and yay, isn't everyone happy? That there's something bigger going on,
you
and I
seem,
need to just grapple
yeah,
with
but
that.
you seem to be moving towards an idea here, if I can pull it out, which is if we had a greater understanding of what took place, it would
Mhm.
make sense. In
I
other
would
words,
like it to make sense.
causa
I want it to make
the
sense.
causality would be rational, logical, and teachable, and would aid the spiritual evolution of each another person. Meaning the dark sides and light sides of God would both be working together. Lex Luthor and Superman would both be like there to help Metropolis. I mean, is that where you're headed in your thinking process here?
That is my belief. That is my hope.
It's a big hope. How do you bring it to the Institute? The
Ah,
Institute for Religious Tolerance, Peace, and Justice. I can't
yeah.
remember.
Well, that's a good question because we're not in the business of preaching to people who is God, what is God. I want in my work, my interfaith activism, I want people to be the best that they can be in their religion or lack of religion, because we have plenty of agnostics in our group. They're wonderful people and they really support this interfaith work. But I want people to be the best Muslim, the best Jew, the best Christian, the best Buddhist that they can be, because I think that each of our religions brings something to the world. So I don't know if I necessarily can put my own personal search into it in a teachable way. That might be me overstepping my bounds, but it definitely informs my work because I believe that if we get together and we do some work together and we build houses for Habitat for Humanity, Christian, Buddhist, Jew, Muslim, all side by side, swinging a hammer, not at each other, but at the nails. All right. That I think that we will make the world a better place. And so I want people to benefit from whatever little bit of wisdom I have from my 55 years, some of which I've gained from you in your above 55 years. I want to bring that. It definitely informs my work, but it's not something I'm going to actively teach them. Hey, by the way, you're having this problem with your gout or whatever. Well, if we get to a higher level and we understand God's work in our lives, you'll be happier. I'm not going to say that to them.
Well, all right.
But
Do you hold there, therefore, you don't hold to the idea of one true religion,
I do not.
which is a Catholic doctrine. It's an Islamic doctrine, right?
Mhm.
Varying degrees of wobbling around that statement. It's been Jewish from time to time. Um, you don't hold to that at all.
I do not. I can't because I don't think that any of the religions that currently are in existence in humanity have a full understanding of the bigger picture. Maybe some of them have fuller understandings in this way or in that way, but I don't think any of them can encapsulate the truth. And by the way, even the Catholic Church has finally realized that to some degree. If you read Nostra Aetate, the great document that comes out of the Second Vatican Council, it acknowledges a ray of truth in basically every other human religion.
Yeah, but they don't walk away from the one true church. With those people who are out there who are quote unquote recovering Catholics, Nostra Aetate number 4, which was in the dogmatic constitution of the church, made sure that there was it's in Lumen Gentium as well, made sure that salvation would not be withheld from people who did not otherwise know and therefore could accept the gospel. They didn't walk away from the one true church. They still maintained that eventually everything would converge and evolve into that, which they can't walk away from if you have the
Mhm.
ubiquity of Christ as Messiah and God. But they did not go backwards, to your earlier point about your mom, go backwards to dividing the world up into, you know, radically opposed good and evil in religions, which really definitely set the environment that made the Holocaust possible, you know.
Mhm.
So anyway, we're
Yeah.
we're getting, moving on here.
Yeah.
Um, Let me just throw some stuff. If you're interested in Dr. Greenberg's book, go to Enlightened Religion Press, ENLIGHTENED Religion Press. I'll try to put that on the screen. And if you want to reach him through me, because I'd like to speak to some more people here. So go to yourgodsearch.com and start up a conversation. And with the three of us, Arik, me, and whoever else shines up, we'll do a conference call or something and we'll talk. All right. So back to you, your God search. What is your basic God search experience? Where are you headed now? I mean,
Yeah.
you've been through a complicated hell with a goodly amount of intellectual tour de force to try to put it in some kind of place.
Yeah. Um, I'm I'm still struggling with a lot of that, but I am trying to uh, continue on a path that understands or believes that there is some type of a higher value to all of our suffering or our pains, our pleasure, all of this, that there has some type of there's a purpose behind it. There's a path. I believe it's a path, that it's not aimless, pointless, just wandering around hedonistically or whatever. I do want to mention there's something behind me. This is a I guess you'd say, a religious artifact in my life. This is just a simple one of these little rice paper tatami screens, but it has a moment in my life. This was maybe about 15, 18 years ago when I was already working at Loyola Marymount University, and a colleague of mine had some type of a similar screen in her office. And I thought to myself, I'd love one of those. I really would love one of those one day. And not too long after, maybe within a week, I showed up to one of my classrooms, and what was sitting, I believe it was inside the classroom in the corner, basically with the garbage, was this very thing. Now, and I remember checking with some of the other offices in the area in this classroom building, saying, "Did anybody leave this here? I'm going to take it home, and people can contact me if somebody actually left it there by accident." Nobody ever contacted me. I took it home. I think I had it in my office for a while. Now here it's at my office at home. But this was, for me, it was a moment of manifestation where I said to the universe, I'd really like that. And I believe that the universe responded by saying, I'm getting choked up here again, because it's that maybe a sort of a sense of a parental presence in my life, the God as parent, that God wants me to get better, to understand God better, to understand the universe better. And God is willing to put a little note in my life saying, I love you. And here's a little gift. Maybe it makes your life a little bit better. It's no bigger than some chocolate candies, but I just want you to know I'm thinking of you. And there's an effect in your life on something like this. And I remember sharing this with you, and I think also you. showed up in my life. We were on a Zoom call together. It was just some kind of an interfaith gathering, and I loved your sense of humor. And you and I reached out to each other through the message on the side of Zoom, and we said, "How you doing? We want to work together." And I don't want to spend too much time with adulations, but you've had an impact in my life, and I feel like that
Okay.
that
Um,
that's God. That's God bringing
all
you
right.
into my life.
So God, a lot of stuff here. I mean,
Yeah.
God did it, the universe did it,
Yeah.
which, we have more to talk about here. Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, I want to say for those people out there, part of your God experience is you will understand. You will. And it's not just me because I've compared notes with a lot of people. So we're getting close to something that could be done in a double blind test. But prayer is a form basically of desire when you're asking for something. And everyone makes prayer into this big giant hoopla, which it is. But basically, it's the response of God or the universe. Those issues are issues of scale. And we'll talk about that later. Scale's a big thing. If you've been following the earlier God search, we've already talked about it. But prayer is a form of desire. And when you were a kid and you were talking to God and talking to Moses and talking to Buddha and talking to, those were
Jesus.
prayers.
Forgot Jesus.
Those were desires. Okay. And when you completed your internal desire, you were turned outward. Those internal desires became an external desire, and you took that on as a career, not just for yourself, but for other people. So if you think those two events are completely related, well, you've manifested more than a little screen in your time. You know, I mean, you manifested an entire life starting with, you know, being basically the messiah of all messiahs and getting the boys to like get in a room together and talk to each other through you. I mean, that's a pretty powerful dude doing that. You know what I mean? You know, I mean, my thing was Superman. I wanted to be invulnerable and come to Earth with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. And I have a few Jedi tricks, but all right, look, hey, this has been Arik. It's great. All right. Continue your
Yeah.
God search. And you can come back here because you got so much in you. I want to just help you by giving you a big place to vent for people. All of you out there, thank you for being here. Go to yourgodsearch.com. And for heaven's sakes, please discover God, uncover God. And if you've been given a bad religion or a confused religion or a religion that's been confused and taught you to be confused, even though you're not confused, but you learned how to be confused, recover from it. Okay? Because the God experience, which is unity and truth and nice integration with life, so everything's good, it exists. But you got to do what Arik said. You got to dare to believe it is unified and it is purposeful. Otherwise, the lenses don't work. With all due respect, may she rest in peace, Mama. Your dad must have had one hell of a time living with her. It must have been difficult. All right. Bless. Next Wednesday, see you 5:45 a.m. and keep experiencing God. It's life. If you're alive, you're on a good search. Thank you, Arik.
Thank you, Michael.
Ciao, ciao.